The Prime Minister chose today, and I don't know if it was a coincidence at all, to announce that Australia is now going to come to the rescue, is going to give Ukraine just a little bit more help to beat Russia.
This additional support will make a real difference, helping the Ukrainian people who continue to show great courage in the face of Russia's illegal, unprovoked and immoral war.
Fine, but all that this amounts to is just $110 million for some humanitarian aid and 70 trucks, some of them armoured, but not the light armoured Hawkeyes that the Ukrainians have been asking for months, nor a single one of our tanks that have never fired a shot in anger here, never will. They're just, why have we got them? Send them to Ukraine where they can do some good. Joining me is the country's best foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of the Australian newspaper. Greg, $110 million more in aid, including these trucks and armoured vehicles. Should we be proud to give so much?
Andrew, great to be with you and welcome back from your sojourn abroad. But look, I think this was a pathetic package today. I think Anthony Albanese is generally a serious Prime Minister on national security, but I think this is pathetic. You can only value it at $110 million if you take the seller's price for these used, clapped-out vehicles we're giving them. These armoured personnel carriers that we're giving them were built in the Vietnam War era. They're older than most of our readers or viewers. They're junk. And the reason for this is simple. So the Prime Minister says he asked the Australian Defence Force what's the best way to aid Ukraine, and this is what they came up with. But in fact, what the government has said to the Defence Force is, we won't give you a single dollar to replenish anything you give to Ukraine. Not a dollar. So any kit you give comes out of your line of your battle lineup. So that means the ADF will only give the Ukrainians absolute junk. These armoured personnel carriers we're giving them are so weak that we didn't deploy them even in Iraq and Afghanistan. We thought they didn't offer sufficient protection to our troops even in our recent deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, we manufacture Hawkeyes and we manufacture Bushmasters in Australia. If we were remotely serious about helping Ukraine, we could give them a couple of hundred of each and simply make a couple of hundred more to replenish what is coming out of the Defence Force lineup. But there is no defence industry activity happening in Australia at the moment. Everything's on a 10-year pause as we wait for the nuclear subs. And the government is actually cutting defence expenditure and now won't. And then the matter you raised about the tanks, we've got 59 ancient Abrams tanks, most of which don't work, and they're being replaced by 70-odd new Abrams tanks. Now, I think it's beyond insane that we have either version, but there is no reason on God's green earth why we keep these old tanks. Now, we could give them, admittedly, they probably don't work, they're probably junk. We'd have to ask the Americans to fix them up for us. Probably the reason we won't give them is that we'd be embarrassed at the shocking state of repair they're in. But I thought this was a really feeble announcement today by a government that is not serious about helping Ukraine.
I'm absolutely appalled by some of the facts you put out there, Greg. This is shocking. Now, this revolt against Putin by the private army that he's actually been using for years to do his dirty work in Syria and Africa and in the Ukraine when they first took over the Crimea. This revolt by this private army called the Wagner Group, and the fact that Putin seems to have fled Moscow in panic as they got to within 200 kilometres of his capital, doesn't it make former President Donald Trump now seem a fool for suggesting just 3 weeks ago the US shouldn't be supporting Ukraine so much, shouldn't be giving it that much aid, that the war's at a stalemate, that he wouldn't even say he wanted Ukraine to win? Listen to this rubbish.
And it's an important question, so important, because we're giving away so much equipment. We don't have ammunition for ourselves.
Would you give Ukraine weapons and funding if you were elected?
I would sit down. Let me just put it a nicer way. If I'm president, I will have that war settled in 1 day, 24 hours.
How would you settle that war in 1 day?
Because I'll meet with Putin, I'll meet with Zelensky. They both have weaknesses and they both have strengths. And within 24 hours, that war will be settled. It'll be over. It'll be absolutely over.
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I don't think in terms of winning and losing.
Greg, surely Trump cannot now say the US should cut aid to Ukraine. It looked like it was bailing out a dictator and a war criminal who's now in imminent danger, far from looking strong. It looks in danger of being deposed by his own people.
Well, you're absolutely right, Andrew. I mean, that was a grotesque performance by Trump. No one today looks a bigger idiot than those figures on the far right of Western politics who thought Putin was somehow or other a defender of Western civilization and a natural ally of us and the United States and of the West generally. Putin is a Stalinist dictator, an unreconstructed communist who runs a Stalinist repressive system at home and invades his neighbours regardless of international law or international borders. Now, the most senior figure who has given expression to the pro-Trump nonsense in Western politics has been Trump himself. I absolutely get it. The Russian collusion stuff was all lies. That was a complete hoax. Trump was completely innocent. But the things Trump says about Putin and about Ukraine are grotesque. And Trump wouldn't even condemn Putin's invasion. He wouldn't agree to support Ukraine. Putin is a wild, erratic dictator who makes war, who has no sense of his own army's inabilities, who has no sense of what his allies are going to do, who creates figures like Prigozhin. Prigozhin was a 9-year jailbird and hot dog salesman until Putin transformed him into a wealthy oligarch and licensed him to run a vicious private army, which has been one of the most brutal military forces we've seen in the last 100 years. And then Prigozhin turned around and wanted to bite Putin. But Putin created all this. And there are people in our polity who think Putin is our ally, and they're partly influenced in that madness by Trump himself.
And don't forget, Russia's such a basket case. It's got a second so-called private, or almost like a private army, the Chechen army, also running riot. Who knows what they might do. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate that.